Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are digging into a case that is so disturbing, it actually became the blueprint for some of Hollywood's most terrifying villains. But the real story here isn't just about the horror. It's a chilling look at how a human mind can break so completely, it tries to become someone else. This is the psychological tragedy of Ed Gein. Okay, before we dive in, a quick but really important heads up. The details of this case are graphic, and honestly, they're deeply unsettling. We're going to focus on the psychology behind it all, but viewer discretion is definitely advised. You know, a case like this, it forces you to ask a really fundamental question. What creates a real-life monster? And today, we're going to search for an answer by exploring the life, the crimes, and the absolutely shattered psyche of Ed Gein. Now, our story doesn't start with his birth. No, we're starting at the end of his freedom, with a shocking discovery that exposed a private world of absolute horror to an unsuspecting public. So let's set the scene. The year is 1957. The place is the quiet, unassuming town of Plainfield, Wisconsin, a town that was about to become infamous. On November 16th, a local hardware store owner, a woman named Bernice Warden, she just vanishes. And the last person known to have seen her, a quiet, kind of odd local guy named Ed Gein. When the police headed out to his remote farmhouse to question him, they had absolutely no idea what they were about to walk into. What they found inside that farmhouse wasn't just evidence of a crime. It was a scene of such unimaginable horror that it would literally haunt the investigators for the rest of their lives. Inside, the house was just a gruesome workshop. Police found masks, actual masks, made from human skin, skulls that had been turned into bowls, even furniture that was upholstered with human remains. It was immediately clear that Gein wasn't just a murderer. He'd been robbing graves for years. And that just raises this obvious, horrifying question, right? How does a person get to this point? To even begin to understand the man behind these atrocities, we have to look back at the suffocating isolation that really defined his entire life. So Edward Gein, born back in 1906, grew up in a household that was just poisoned by two extremes. On one side, you have his father, a violent alcoholic, and on the other, his mother, Augusta, a religious fanatic who was completely and totally domineering. She relentlessly preached to Ed and his brother that the outside world, and especially women, were just inherently evil and sinful. The family lived out on the secluded farm, pretty much cut off from everybody else in Plainfield. Augusta made sure of it. She kept her sons isolated on purpose, which left Ed with zero friends, no social skills, and this deeply warped view of reality that was shaped entirely by her fanatical beliefs. He was, for all intents and purposes, a prisoner in his own home. As Ed grew into an adult, a series of tragedies would just strip away the little family he had, leaving him completely alone with nothing but the oppressive memory of his mother. And this isolation, well, it would prove to be the final push for his incredibly fragile psyche. I mean, his whole world just collapsed in a shockingly short amount of time. In 1940, his father died. Just 4 years later, his brother Henry was killed in a fire that to this day seems pretty suspicious. But the final devastating blow came in 1945 when his mother, the one single dominant force in his entire life, passed away. At 39 years old, Ed Gein was completely and utterly alone. And her death, that was the trigger. All alone in that silent farmhouse, Gein's profound grief, mixed with his untreated mental illness, started to twist into this horrifying obsession. He wanted his mother back, and his broken mind came up with a grotesque way to try and make it happen. Psychologists often point to a condition known as necrophilia, but probably not in the way that you're thinking. His obsession with corpses wasn't really a sexual thing. No, it was rooted in something way more bizarre and, in a really twisted way, tragic. So he started digging up the graves of recently buried middle-aged women, specifically women who he thought looked like his mother. He wasn't just collecting bodies, he was collecting parts. He wanted to build what's been called a woman's suit made of skin so that he could literally, in his delusion, become his mother and bring her back to life. So after his arrest in 1957, the legal system had this incredibly difficult question on its hands. Was Ed Gein a cold-blooded killer who needed to be punished? Or was he a man so profoundly mentally ill that he couldn't even be held responsible for his own actions? It actually took over a decade to finally bring him to trial. In 1968, a jury found him guilty of murder. But then, in a second phase of the trial that focused only on his sanity, the judge very quickly ruled that he was not guilty by reason of insanity, which confirmed he was mentally ill when the crimes happened. So Ed Gein never went to prison. Instead, he was committed to a series of mental health facilities. And that's where he stayed until he died from respiratory failure in 1984 at the age of 77. While Gein's own life ended pretty quietly in an institution, his dark and twisted story, well, it was just beginning a new life of its own. It would go on to inspire some of the most terrifying figures in all of pop culture. The ripple effect from this one case is just staggering. Think about Norman Bates from Psycho, right? With that intense, overpowering obsession with his mother. That's Gein. Or Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre with his house full of horrors and a mask made of human skin. Pure Gein. Even Buffalo Bill from The Silence of the Lambs, who tries to create a woman's suit. All of these iconic villains draw direct inspiration from the real-life crimes of Ed Gein. But, and this is so important to remember, behind all the horror movie villains and the sensational headlines, this was a profound human tragedy. It's a story about what can happen when severe mental illness, extreme loneliness, and a lifetime of abuse are just left to fester in total isolation. Which leaves us with this final, really unsettling question. Was Ed Gein simply a monster? Or was he, in some way, also a victim of a broken mind and a horrific upbringing? The terrifying truth might just be that he was, somehow, both.